Thoughtful Bro. I am here with the great Dana Spiotta. I can't wait to have this conversation. Sometimes you just find a gem on the internet and you're like, oh my God, I wish I could talk to that person. And the great thing about having a podcast is that you often can make that happen. And that is why being the Thoughtful Bro on Today of All Days is such a delight. So before we get started with Dana, a few words about the bro and about the show and about A Mighty Blaze. A Mighty Blaze is where we stream. We go to Facebook and YouTube Live. You can always find the show, obviously, on the podcast afterwards. We're here every Tuesday at 2 to talk about what makes great books tick, what makes great authors tick. And A Mighty Blaze, if you don't know, is an all-volunteer initiative connecting writers and readers virtually. We never ask for money at A Mighty Blaze. If you want to show us the love, just follow us on social media, tell your friends about us, repost us, all the things. But if you are in the mood to spend money, I would say spend it on books that ask you, what does rebellion look like in suburbia and in middle age? What does it look like when your parents have passed on and your children leave the house and you try to reclaim your own life? Spend your hard-earned dollars on books like Wayward by Dana Spiotta. We are going to put links to buy that book through bookshop.org in the chat. If you want to ask Dana a question, if you're trying to figure out that formal structure in your novel, or you have some question about one of the great MFA programs in the country, or anything really, just pop it in the chat and we will ask Dana at the end of the show. Now, here's a little bit more about Dana. She is the author of 5 novels. She's been a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award, a finalist for the National Book Award, and the winner of the American Academy's Rosenthal Foundation Award. Among other awards, she's also won a Guggenheim Fellowship, a John Updike Prize from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. And as I said, she teaches in the MFA program at Syracuse University. Her latest book, which came out a few years ago, is called Wayward. It was listed as one of the best books of the year by the New York Times, Washington Post, Vogue, The Guardian, and more. And the New York Times said the book reads like a fever dream, a virtuosic, singular, and very funny portrait of a woman seeking sanity and purpose in a world gone mad. Dana Spiotta, welcome to the Thoughtful Bro.
Thank you so much, Mark.
Well, I just can't wait to get into all of it. And like I said, this aforementioned video was a lecture that you gave in 2011 at like the Colgate Writers Conference.
Long
time and it was just absolutely joyful, Spitfire, bravura performance of about 30 minutes on Joyce and Faulkner and Jennifer Egan. And I just, the thing that I gravitate towards, Dana, is joy. There's just not enough joy in the world. And I would just say, again, we'll put a link to this video in the chat. Listen to it after this interview. But like this lecture that she gave, it was just so filled with joy. It just radiated. I was like, this is a person who loves this topic. And I wanted to kind of go deeper on that with you.
Okay.
Is it fair? Hold on. But like, is it fair? Am I just reading into that, or was the joy and passion really there?
Yeah, I do really love talking about books and novels, especially. I do love talking about them and thinking about them, and that's Mm-hmm. Writing is harder. Writing them is harder, less joyful.
Yeah, totally.
Moments of joy, moments of pain.
There you go. Well, anyway, it was a lot of joy, and I loved it, and it was captured in a bottle. So here we go. Before we get into all that structure stuff, I do want to spend a little while talking about Wayward, which is a terrific book. And before I go any further on that, why don't you just give us the thumbnail of Wayward?
Oh, so Wayward is it takes place in 2017. And it begins with this woman who's looking at a house. She has a hobby of looking at houses, at open houses. And it's this very ramshackle, rundown house in Syracuse that she impulsively signs a contract to buy. And then she realizes she's leaving her husband and her daughter.
She realizes.
Her teenage daughter. And she kind of blows up her life in the first couple pages. I really had that. That was kind of what I started with. Somebody just kind of blew up their life. And then she's going through menopause, perimenopause, which is like your pre-menopause, where she can't sleep. And she's kind of having a breakdown, I would say. And at the same time, it's tied in with the politics of Trump's inauguration at the beginning of 2017. And her just trying to figure out, I think the way I think of it as, what have you done? That midlife moment where you're sort of you're reckoning with the fact that your life is going to end at some point, and have you done enough with what you've been given, and really kind of interrogating this idea of privilege and complicity and trying to be a good person. And she's so it was exciting. To the beginning of the book really has a lot of satirical elements, and then it kind of gets, as it progresses, I think much more emotional, and it kind of ends in a different place. Yeah.
Oh, I'd say so. And it gets into some really interesting formal stuff at the end.
Right.
But yeah, I love the way you phrased it, that, you know, the way you talk about how she kind of like discovers that she's divorcing her husband. There's this way that like, she's like on the way home from buying the house, that's when she realized her marriage was over. And I think that's often how these kinds of things are. Like, your body sort of has already figured it out. Your brain is like the last one to come along. And she's like, oh, I guess my life as I thought it was is just over.
Something like that happened to me years ago that inspired that, which is that I was at my friend's house, and I was looking at the classifieds when they had classified ads, and I was looking at apartments, and I was like, oh, this looks like a good apartment. This looks like a good apartment. I'm like, why am I looking at apartments? Like, oh yeah, I think I want to move out of my from my boyfriend. And it is true. It's almost like your brain is doing the work that you need to be doing, and you're just not facing it yet. Yeah.
But I think this book is about a point in life that is just very, very particular, and it's a huge thing. This moment when, you know, parents are getting older, or, you know, they passed away, and the child has moved out of the house, and there's sort of nothing tethering a person, a man or a woman, to what has tethered them the last, say, 20, 25 years. And you still have, you know, largely like your health and your mind, and you're all of a sudden you're just like, how did I get here? What am I doing here? And what am I going to do next? I think it's like an extremely serious moment in a person's development through life.
Yeah, very much so. I think part of the physical symptoms that she's experiencing of being sleepless and having these kind of night flashes, and I think the drama that some people experience when they go through menopause, or, you know, perimenopause, it's you can't pretend that everything is going to stay the same forever. Your body is a really strong visceral relationship to your own mortality. So I think, and because you can't sleep, you're thinking about your life, and you're, you know, so I thought it was very tied into the physical experience that she was having. Coincidentally, I was writing the book often in the middle of the night when I was experiencing that. So it feels like your body is also telling you, this is finite. You can't just, you know, not pay attention to what's happening. And of course we need to go through life not paying attention to all those questions. But when something dramatic happens, when like that, it's this foundational questioning from time to time, I think is kind of what we have art for as well. I think, to think about the whole life scope of a life and where you're at in it, and reminding yourself that it is a finite journey, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like I'm coming up on that time in life myself, and I just think it's amazing how death is hidden from you, and how life just sort of takes this shape of like climbing up a mountain, and then you get to the mountain in the middle of your life, and then there's a view to the sea, and it's like it's really, that's where you got to go. You're going to walk down this hill into the sea, and that's just sort of like, it's amazing that the sea being death, just sort of hidden from you your whole life. It just seems so unreal, and it just sort of rolls into view sort of quickly, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think with Sam in particular, she says in the book that there's the sense that, you know, if it is the midpoint of your life, in midlife, what's to come is much harder than what went before, because you're going to see your parents die, and you're going, you know, and you're going to get older, and then you're going to die. And so, are you prepared for that? You know, that you have to sort of, and she feels when she finds out early in the book, I don't think I'm giving anything away, that her mother is dying, and she does not feel prepared for that, you know, and what has she been doing that she's not prepared for what is obviously going to come, which is the, you know, a lot of letting go in the second half of one's life, right?
So the male midlife crisis book is filled with like hot 20-somethings and red Corvettes. I feel like the midlife crisis sort of is a gendered thing. You almost have to say a female midlife crisis if that's what you mean. I'm just curious what you think about that. Like, A, is this a midlife crisis book? B, like, does it seem also to you that it's typically a male gendered thing? And C, like, if women have equivalent midlife crises, like, how do they differ from the male one?
Yeah, I mean, there is this, one of the things I was thinking about when I was writing it is I didn't want it to have the cliches of a midlife crisis book in the sense that I didn't want it to be about her, feeling like she's losing her looks or her sexual appeal. I wanted it to be different from that. So sometimes when I'm starting novels, I think about what I don't want it to be as much as I want it to be, because you're kind of like, what hasn't been addressed. Right. So I think that I was very aware of both male and female midlife crisis. I mean, you could say like Mrs. Dalloway is a midlife crisis novel. I think we use that term with men more because there's the cliche of the Corvette and the young girlfriend, and it seems to be all about like not wanting to face your aging body. I think maybe one thing that's different is for many women, because of the physical symptoms of aging are so dramatic. Men are more like men have a leveling off of hormones, but it's more gradual. With women, it's much harder to pretend that you're younger than you are, because you have this like very dramatic change of life. So I wanted to write about that really viscerally and specifically the body element of it, because I haven't seen that as much in the culture, as it feels like something that doesn't get talked about as much. Although now it seems like with the Miranda July book and that's sort of like having a big moment. People talking about it.
Yeah, I had to think about that book when I was reading this. I was like, wow, yeah. In a way, your book, just with such nuance and specificity, kind of unpacks the particulars of Sam's life and everything she's going through, everything that's going on in the world, everything about the particulars of her particular daughter and her particular mother and particular self. But in a way, it just seems what's going on is just so simple. It's that humans are inherently restless. We seek the feeling of life. We seek new experiences. This is, the hunter-gatherer, which is kind of woven into us, that we just kind of need to keep moving through the world. And it's like, in some ways, I was just looking at Sam and it's like, there's so much kind of theorizing about like, what is this all about? And what does it all mean? And I'm just like, oh my God, she just wants to feel alive. Is that just totally a stupid oversimplification?
No, I mean, I think she wants to feel alive. And I think she wants to, I think like many of us, she wants to believe that her life has meaning, I mean, I think that's what we want. That's part of, I think rather than thinking of it as a midlife crisis, I would say it's a kind of a middle-age novel. And I think middle age is a really fascinating place to write from, because you can remember being young and you can see that all clearly. And you can see what's to come, and you're sort of at this you have this moment of clarity we can see in both directions. And you're not on either side of it completely yet. And so it feels like a very it feels like an opportunity for wisdom and for big changes if you're not happy with what you've done so far. And I think she has I think there's all my characters in my book sort of have a sense of like, for me, trying to be a good person or trying to live a better life and kind of failing at it in a lot of ways. But I think I'm very interested in the trying, in the trying to, I think just trying to not be self-deluded and trying to see what you really are and where you really are, and being brave about that. And so I'm very interested in when those moments when people do that, I find that very moving,
Not that you're kind of like a public figure who's out there talking about, how to deal with midlife crises, like as a kind of psychotherapist or something, but I'm just kind of curious. The character in this book, she buys a house, and like that sort of precipitates
a very inexpensive house.
Very inexpensive
Syracuse, so yeah.
Syracuse, right? Kind of run down, beat up, inexpensive house. But like, it's not even, it's sort of a cheap house, but set aside that like maybe not everybody can afford a house, but just a dramatic gesture. I'm just kind of curious, like, she does some other kind of like, I would say like lashing out. She feels angry at times.
Oh yeah, she's
but
very
she does a number of things. I'm just wondering, like, what is the answer? Like, what ought a person feeling these things? How can they do it constructively? Does it always mean leaving your marriage and buying a house? What else can it mean?
I definitely think it does not mean you have to leave. Some people who read the book were very upset at her reckless behavior. And I think characters who are reckless are interesting. They can, sometimes I think about with characters, that they're, what if, that question of what if you did do this, or what if you did do that? And it's interesting to see people make dramatic mistakes and follow the consequences of that. As a person in my own life, I would never do that. I don't have that kind of recklessness, but I find people that act in dramatic ways compelling. And I think it's a way to sort of explore those things and challenge yourself as a reader and as a writer by following out those consequences and see where they lead. And I never have the answer. I write because I don't have the answer. I'm sort of trying to figure it out myself.
Yeah.
So I put these things in motion, and I think you get at something where you say it's very specific. It really has to be located. It was very important for me to have it be located in a very idiosyncratic, specific person in a very specific time that had these constraints and a very specific place. And I think that particularity that you're talking about is really important to get a sense of universal, like what James Joyce says about through the particular, the universal.
Yeah.
Let her, she is kind of weird. She's obsessed with buildings and architecture. She's does these crazy things. She's very angry. Sometimes she keys a car at one point.
Oh yeah.
She yells at some bros when she's working out because they're telling her what to do. And she does this stand up and upsets her daughter. And, she does all these terrible, she makes a lot of mistakes. Yeah.
She's a mess.
She's kind of a mess. Yeah. I mean, I think she ends up in a better place at the end,
Yes,
Yeah.
She does.
Hard earned.
Yeah. But it's like
at peace. I think, yeah.
In a way, I would say, yeah. One last thing I wanted to say about this is like one thing I've been thinking a lot about is time and the passage of time and the kind of speeding up of time, as you get older. And I have a number of thoughts about this. But so one is that I think, time moves faster because there's less novelty in your life. And I think, when there's a big change in your life, it can have the effect of slowing down time. And that's kind of biological because your brain is like, whoa, something is different here. I have to encode it and really understand it and so on. There's also this kind of idea that like every year that passes is less of a % of your whole life. So it just feels like, well, what's another year? But when you're like 3, another year is a big deal, right? Yeah. So time moves slower, I think, when you're younger. But definitely, there's a way that I was just thinking about this. And I was thinking, like it's a way to kind of reclaim life. And it's a way to almost purchase more life for yourself by doing grand things and changing yourself in grand ways for these reasons. It's like this change makes life seem richer. I think it makes life seem slower. It seems like there's just more happening. There's more to it. And I think like this urge to change something drastically is sort of, and get out of your routine is just a very life affirming kind of act.
Yes, I mean, I think that's true. And also, but we don't exist in a vacuum. And so I think one of the things the book is really interested in is the effect it has on her daughter and her husband as well, but primarily her daughter. And some of the book is narrated from the daughter's point of view. And we sort of see, so the book itself is sort of challenging, I think, it isn't just your life. That one of the things about being in middle life is that you have responsibilities and you have connections to other people, and you can't unilaterally change your life without it having a huge fallout. Yep. So that was something I was very interested in too, is what is her obligation as a mother and to her daughter, and her mother's obligation to her, and that family dynamic between knows 3 generations, you know.
Yep. Okay. So the book is terrific. I've seen a lot of interesting comments in the chat about people who love the book and kind of insights about the book. Thank you, everybody. Yes, the book is fantastic. And certainly, if you read All Fours by Miranda July, which a lot of people did, it's a great companion piece to that. It covers a lot of the same territory in a quite different way. So I want to get into this craft lecture that had me so bewitched, and I was like, what is this? I want to understand everything. So this is a craft lecture you gave like about 12 years ago or 13 years ago. It's about Faulkner, Joyce, DeLillo, Egan. I think the basic heart of the lecture is just about how a formal structure can do 2 things. It can support and hold together the other things that the artist is doing, kind of a scaffolding and foundation, but it can also create a kind of parallel emotion and meaning for the work. And I think one of the things that's so interesting about hearing you talk about is how you feel like you are as a reader, receptor to this kind of thing. And like sort of what is happening on the formal structure level is also kind of working for you artistically in parallel with, like, say, the traditional character arc. So that is what was so interesting and what I wanted to unpack. But just first of all, can we just like talk about these 2 ways that structure can be talked about? I mean, when I hear somebody talking about structure for a novel, the way I normally, and this could just be me personally, the way I normally take it is character arc, things like, you know, the hero's journey or a genre convention, like, you know, a romantic comedy has certain kind of beats in it. And like, that's the structure. But formal structure, I think, as you defined it, is different. It's about the order of the events, who the narrator is, almost the appearance of the text on the page, multimedia, things like that. So just, do you feel like that's a fair distinction, that those are the kind of the 2 kinds of structure that we can talk about?
Well, I mean, I think what you're saying, I think there is like there is a narrative structure, right? Where you just have where things happen, there's consequences, and that leads to more things happening. And it can be character driven, maybe it can be plot driven, but there's that. And I guess what I was trying to talk about in that lecture a little bit was, you know, if you think of a novel as a system of meaning, right?
Yeah.
Then the where you place things, where chapter breaks are, where let's say you have 2 strands in a novel, right? Like this common novel form would be to have, you know, you have one narrative going and then you cut to another narrative and you cut back and forth between the 2 of them, like a kind of double, or you could do 3 and there'd be like a triple helix that you cut between. And so that when you do that, the story is happening in those narrative, you know, what happens in each narrative strand, but also the reader is thinking, well, these are going to connect somehow, right? And they'll start to connect thematically, maybe before they connect narratively. And then there's the question of when you're cutting in and what you're juxtaposing, right? So when you leave this one and you go to that one, you know, so like, let's say you're reading Middlemarch or something and you have a big section that's Dorothea, and you're into it and you're involved and you're excited. And then the novel looks over here and takes up another narrative. And you're thinking, well, I like this. Well, why are we looking over here? So you're already kind of creating sort of, I think, a horizontal conversation as well as a forward one. And then as you move back and forth between them, you kind of get like this extra torque, I think. So I'm thinking about just those, when you think about the novel as a whole object and all the little pieces of it. And so I think it's like, we often talk about these micro level of the sentence, right? A sentence has a stop at the period, right? And you could maybe put a semicolon and you'd have like a semi-stop and then you'd have another sentence, but then you have a paragraph break and you could have a space break if you wanted a bigger break, or you could have a chapter break. And each one of those things makes the reader read in a different way and make meaning in a different way. Like, you know, that beat that you're stopping at. So if you think of the whole book as like almost like a giant sentence, right? So where are the stops? You know, what are the juxtapositions? What are we looking away from? What are we returning to? So by analyzing those structural, architectural decisions the writer's making, I think, and I would give you another example. So in one of my novels, Innocents and Others, I had started out with this kind of set piece intro, which is like an essay, an online essay. And I do like to mix different formats in my books. I think it's just the way that I kind of reflect the world. It's the way that I think the world is legible to me. So it had this little essay thing. I didn't really know where it was going. But then as I was writing the novel, I thought, well, I want to, this other character is going to write an essay too. And I knew if I put an essay at the beginning and I use that same format later, that the reader's going to connect those things and try to make meaning out of it. So the reader's a pattern seeking machine, right? Your brain. So you're trying to understand what these structural things are doing. So you as a writer can use that. So, you know, for example, so in a sentence, you might say, use a metaphor or simile to say, this is like this. And I think what's great about a novel is you have this huge duration, and you can say with a formatting issue or with a structural thing, you can say, hey, reader, this is connected to this. I'm not saying that sentence. I'm just showing you, because you recognize the form, you'll see, oh, that's like that, right? So I think that's one part of it. And then the other part of it is just that how you can use formal constraints to in a novel as a way of creating meaning, but that there's dangers with that too. And I guess that's what I was trying to talk about, is how something can become, if the form can become, if you have a kind of conceit that you're putting in the novel, and you just keep doing it, like, you know, like I'm going to have horoscopes here at the beginning of each chapter. The reader's going to notice that. And then at a certain point, it's going to be kind of feel like a little contrived and boring. So one thing I think you have to do is beware of too much neatness in these structural conceits or organizing principles that you might use, right? Yeah. That you have to kind of like swerve from it and deepen it. So that also creates an intensification, because the reader's picking up patterns, but then you're switching it a little bit and doing something unexpected to keep that energy going forward, because you always want the energy of the book to intensify. So that can happen narratively, it can happen with a character, and it also happens with form. Does that make sense?
Oh my God, the whole thing made sense. I mean, it was like, I had like 9 different bookmarks where I was like, gotta go back to that, gotta go back to that. So
Sorry.
See if I can like, there's so much good stuff in there. I mean, I guess, okay. So just to start out, like, I think that like a lot of the things that you're drawing attention to about form are just kind of, there is an inherent energy in some of the materials of the novel. Like, so for example, like the end of a chapter is exciting. The beginning of a chapter is exciting. A list is exciting. Dialogue is exciting. You know, yeah. It's like like the shape of the words on the page has its own kind of energy. And I think part of what you're talking about is sort of using these materials to kind of release some of this latent energy, and it's kind of using all the tools that the novel have, which are specific to the novel. So, which would be like, so one thing that I'm wondering though is like, say, let's take like Tolstoy. I can't remember exactly how Anna Karenina and War and Peace are structured, and if there's a lot of flashbacks or whatever. But something like I read recently, The Death of Ivan Ilyich. It's just like extremely straightforward. There's like a little bit at the beginning, and then you go back in time. But basically, it's a straightforward thing. But you know, any kind of like Shakespeare, right? I mean, it's just has kind of Aristotelian unities. My question to you though is just like, so let's just take Shakespeare, right? It's just going forward from the beginning, and one domino is hitting the next. Is that boring to you in some way? You know, and so I figured you'd say no, but the question is, why could Shakespeare have done better? If he was, you know what I mean? Like if he was able to use some of these other tools.
No, I mean, the book I'm reading right now, I think her name is pronounced Tokarczuk. Olga Tokarczuk, Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead.
Yeah, she won the Nobel Prize, right?
Yeah, she won. So she knows what she's doing. It's all just a first-person narrator, you know, and kind of the arrow of time just really moves forward. I mean, she does look back, but within it, there's many ways to do it. And I think one of the things when I teach the novel structure class is, there's some formal things that you're going to do that are going to draw attention to themselves, and others that are invisible. And that you want that narrative dream to just flow without these distractions of form, maybe. But she also has but every novel has a form, whether it's invisible or not, or whether it draws attention to itself or not, you know. So I think just being aware of all the tools that you're talking about, and do you want to use them or not? I mean, do you want to have chapter titles? Do you want to have numbers? Do you want to have, I mean, like in Mao Tzu, DeLillo has photographs, that he puts in at the beginning of each book that are chosen, and you don't know, you're just thinking about that as you read forward. And so, it depends on how much authorial intrusion you want. And I always say to students, look, everything is a decision, right? And a decision has consequences as a writer, right? So you have to make sure the payoff is worth the cost. There's no freebies. So if you interrupt that narrative invisibility, you lose that. The reader's going to get woken up for a minute, and you don't always want that. But if you do, maybe the payoff is worth it. So for someone like DeLillo, I want you to stop. I want you to think about this picture of a soccer match after this previous chapter. And I'm not going to explain anything. And then you're going to keep reading. But in that moment, he's figuring that's worth the cost of stopping the reader from that seamless read through. Does that make sense?
It does. Of course.
So you have to make sure it's exciting enough or worthwhile enough that that is worth that interruption.
Yeah, but that's the trick, right? And I would just say, like, I read a lot of books for this show, and just also in my life, and I read a lot of experimental work, and I'm sure at Syracuse, you've got young people coming in the MFA program all the time, and I'm sure they're kind of interested in experimenting some. And I guess like the trick is just like, how do you know when it's actually helping and when is it just a crutch and like my story isn't working? I know I will just like put all the events in reverse order or just whatever it is. I mean, and I think like you take somebody like James Joyce, and I know that you're a Joyce scholar. You hear this phrase a lot, like I want to make you like teach a course about James Joyce. I feel like that counts anyway. But you take someone like James Joyce, and it's like, so first of all, he was writing in an extremely, and to my taste, sort of like, his early writing to me is too tight, and it's too kind of formal and traditional. And then he really obviously loosens up later in his career. But like, you hear people talk about all this formal experimentation. He's really kind of like the real patron saint of that stuff. And I think he was writing in a very traditional way originally, and he was never like trying to make things difficult for the reader or trying to challenge the reader in my mind. I just think he had a mind that was like one in a zillion, and he could only do what he was doing in this extremely complicated, innovative way. That was like the only outcome that was possible. He didn't do it because he like wanted to try like make it hard for the reader on purpose or something. Do you see what I'm saying? I feel like some of it is gratuitous is what I'm trying to say. And I feel like sometimes it's earned.
Yeah, no, I think absolutely. I think that if you, the form, let's be really clear about this. I think that it has to be an organic necessity for you to write the book that you're writing. Mm-hmm. So it can't be something that you stick on, externally because it just like you think it would be cool or whatever to do that. And a reader can tell right away if something is sort of it just going to seem pretentious and boring. So you have to the way that I work and the way that a lot of writers I think work is you're writing the book and you don't really know the shape of it, you don't really know the form of it, and then you kind of come across a problem, and then that sort of forces you to think of the form. And then after you've done that for a while, you start to think about I only start thinking about the overall shape of it and how the different parts relate to one another when I'm really pretty far in. I do that kind of that cliche, not cliche, but the thing that the often repeated E.L. Doctorow thing about how writing a novel is driving a car at night in the fog. And I wrote it down so I could tell, I want to make sure I get it right. Driving at night in the fog, you can only see as far as your headlights, but you can make the whole trip that way. Yeah. So I kind of agree with that for the first, 100 pages, the first year. But then I think you start to think about how all these different things that you have in motion, how they can be played with. And the way that I write is I read over everything I've written before I add more. So the density is really coming from the language, the sentence by sentence language, from the characters. And then you're sort of reading over and noticing stuff. And then that informs more of it. And that's really how I'm working, is I'm getting, and then you start to notice just connections, and you can decide to emphasize those or not. And just kind of being aware of where the book is taking you, and doing what George Saunders said in his interview with you, which is like looking for the energy, And so I start out thinking I know what the book might be about, and I know what the questions I'm interested in. But then as you're writing, you're aware that the real things are going to come out. And so it's that interplay between the intuitive, right, and the conscious. And for me, I'm doing both, because I'm rereading what I'm writing as I go forward. So I'm revising as I go along. And that doesn't mean when I get to the end of a draft, I'm not then revising again. But I'm also very attuned to that I'm making something that's going to be a bigger scale, and trying to think about the scale, even when I'm on the line level. So I'm hoping that the attention to the line, the attention to the paragraph, the attention to the chapter, the attention to the book is all kind of organically tied together, and ideally essential and organic, and by the end inevitable. Does that make sense?
Oh, sure. And I think in Wayward, that happens when you have a kind of new character from a different time who enters as a kind of surprise guest narrator into the book. And I thought it really worked wonderfully. And it was very, I never would have guessed it in a million years that that's what was going to happen, but it reinforced the themes so wonderfully, and it gave the book a kind of break that I needed too. I needed a little time away from these characters and then to return to them. So it was so interesting too, because you were not doing that kind of thing throughout the whole book. It really just came out of nowhere, and it was like, oh, here's like a totally radical formal innovation in what's really a pretty traditionally structured book. And hey, it really worked. But here's what I want to say, I guess, is that I think that is some expert, like triple black belt kind of stuff. And I just think that this making me sound like an old man, but I just feel like sometimes I feel like people jump right to, being like late Kandinsky, and they don't, they don't take a moment to actually learn how to draw a nose, and I don't know. I think it's great that you are so gifted and so experienced that you can pull off things like that, but it's not for everybody. And I just feel like sometimes in the things that I read, I'm like, ugh, you're just doing this, aren't you?
Right. Right. I mean, I think it's like, you have to pay attention to what you think is exciting and beautiful, and the books that you love, that you really love, not because everyone's told you they're great, but the books that you really find, and be honest about what you think. Be honest about that, and that is the way to avoid pretension. Yeah.
All right, I want to for the last part of the interview get into some kind of MFA life stuff. Because Syracuse got some real mojo, as everybody knows. There's a lot of great folks coming out of Syracuse, and a lot of great teachers at Syracuse. I just want to talk about that. So first of all, actually, before I get into my first question, let's just talk about the Syracuse mojo for a moment. And do you feel the mojo? Do you feel like Syracuse is killing it right now? And if so, why or why not?
Well, I started teaching there in 2009, and I felt it when I came. I mean, it's one of the oldest programs in the country. So it's a great program for a really long time. So I felt really lucky to be a part of it. And, but I think the key is that it's always, all the teachers have always really been interested in teaching. So we've had a lot of great writers, from, Tobias Wolff and Raymond Carver to George Saunders to our current, who's still teaching there, but also Mona Awad, Chanel Benz, Jonathan D. We all take teaching really seriously. And so what I was struck by when I got there is that everybody was really into the teaching. Mary Carr was really, no matter how famous they were really into the teaching, and nobody was trying to it wasn't just like a day job to them. And what I found is that the teaching helped them be better writers. And I was like, if I'm going to be a teacher, because I didn't start teaching till after I'd been my second novel, and I had been working in a restaurant, and I was like, can I do this? Can I teach and write at the same time? And they were really showing me, particularly George, who was like sort of helping me become a teacher because I hadn't really taught before. He, when the writing's going well, then you're a great teacher. So you always have to do your work, and then you bring that to the classroom, and then you're around all these really smart, amazing, smart young people, and that inspires you in your work. And if you can make those things work together, then it's great. And I think you get at this community of people where everybody really cares about books, and they really care about reading, and they really care about writing. And so I think it helps to be in a world like that. I didn't go to an MFA. I didn't get that. And I think if I had, I would have figured out things a lot sooner, Yeah.
Okay. You brought up Mary Karr. Now, in a New York Times profile of you, she said the following: as a colleague, she is a dream, whip smart and tirelessly generous, but she doesn't pander to student egos. She knows how to deliver bad news to a young writer. Okay, so let's get into this. Giving feedback is a gift. Not everybody has it. And I just want to know, so number one, like, what is an example of the kind of bad news that you have to often give to young writers? And how is it delivered with such a deft touch?
I don't think I do deliver that much bad news, actually. The thing is that I've changed a lot as a writer as a teacher over the years, where I think I've become a lot. There's no real reason to be. It's just one moment in time, and I have complete faith in the students being great writers, even if this particular sentence isn't working or this particular story isn't working. So I try to focus on letting them figure out how to be the writer that they can be, but I have total faith that they'll get there if they work hard at it. I guess my only thing I would say is, like, the only mistake is to not write and to not have a habit of writing and reading. And then you're not going to get better. But if you work hard, you will definitely get better. A writer once told me, if you keep at this, you can't imagine where you'll be in 10 years. And that was really exciting, because I was thinking, like, wow, like, I can make these mistakes, and I can have these, failures, which is a big part of it. And I can, but then but I'm always learning something, and it's taking me somewhere in the bigger picture of things. And so that's one thing. And then the other thing I think is really important is I think the thing that I am discouraging about is career focus, because writing, you can become a great writer and not get published. You can become a great writer and get published and nothing happens to your book. That happens all the time. So one of the things I think about as a teacher is encouraging ambition artistically, but tempering expectations in terms of making being able to make a living from writing, because it is so hard. And so I maybe that is one place where I try to be, like, super realistic and say, hey, it's really hard to get in this MFA program. You're here, and guess what? It just keeps staying hard, because it is hard. It is hard. It's a hard life. But writing, in terms of ambition, the sky's the limit. Be a great artist. And I think that you have to find, and I guess the important thing is, what you're doing in your writing has to be meaningful, regardless of whether you get success in the literary world.
There you go.
So then you're not wasting any time, right? You're like, I'm accomplishing this amazing thing. I'm making something beautiful and meaningful. And that is great. And then if somebody doesn't publish it or doesn't like it, you still did that thing, and it still made your life better, I think. Does that make sense?
Oh, totally. Yeah. I guess just to go back to the, like, giving bad news to writers thing for just 1 second. There is one of the hardest questions to answer for anybody in the whole kind of feedback, like, is this good? Am I good? kind of cycle. It's so painful, and every writer goes through it, self-doubt and kind of trying to have the courage to put your work out there. There's always this thing where it's like, well, I showed it to Dana and Dana said, this needs more work. It's not ready. But I showed it to this other person and they said it's great. And there's just like, there's stories of this as old as the sun, where it's like the artist like almost left that song off the album and that's their biggest hit of all time, and all these kinds of things, right? Or the book that was a bestseller, but now we look back on it and we're like, what a bunch of drivel, right? Right. Sort of, I'm trying to connect the kind of like this almost impossible to answer question of like, is this good? And should I listen to this critical person? Just connect that to this kind of, should I keep going? Like, who should I listen to? When should I say enough of the feedback? I'm just going out with this thing.
Well, I mean, it's always one of the things that we talk about in the program is that, you're here to figure out what your artistic project is. And I can't tell you what that is. Only you can figure out what that is. And one of the things is all the professors, and I think one of the reasons why Syracuse is a good program is everybody has very different aesthetic interests. And I think we all know art judgment is pretty subjective, it's complicated. And so you might show me something and I will give you feedback, and then you'll show it to another professor and they'll give you very different feedback. And you'll say, well, how do I reconcile these things? And you say, well, that's for you to figure out. What do you want your work to be? What do you want your project to be? It's up to you. So really it's about just, kind of putting it back on the student and saying, why do you want to do this? What do you want to spend your time on? Because it doesn't matter what I think, and it doesn't matter what anybody thinks. It matters what you think about your work. And that gets back to this idea of, what do you genuinely find beautiful? What do you genuinely find meaningful? What do you love in what you read? So we all start as readers and sometimes become writers. So always going back to that reader part of yourself and thinking about what you love seems important, and what you think is, a good book.
I just
or a good story.
I went through this period. I got an English degree from college, and I'm just kind of a very thorough person, and spent so many years just like reading the classics, trying to like truly thoroughly educate myself. But I got to this point, and it actually wasn't that long ago in my life, where I was like, Mark, I want you to do something for me. This is my inner monologue. I want you to only from now on read things and watch movies that you like. Can you do that? And like, do you actually know what you like? Can you pull apart what you ought to like and what other important, influential people like from what you like and what you think is good? And I'm just noting, you've said that a few times in this interview, this idea of like kind of reading what you love. I just think, especially for young people, it's a really hard thing to do, because like, if you're just like, I don't like, say, Ulysses by James Joyce. Right. Like, what does that even mean? You're like not allowed to say that because everybody else respects it. But it's like, maybe you don't like it now, but you will like it 10 years from now. Or something, you know what I mean? So I don't know. I just think this idea of being honest about what you like is actually far trickier than it seems.
Yeah. And also it is true though, that there's books that you're not ready to read, and you read them and you don't see why, but that doesn't mean that those books are bad. It just means that, go back to them. If a lot of people you respect and admire think there's something there, maybe there is something there. That's certainly true with movies as well. Yeah. And I also think it's useful to think why you don't like something, where it loses you and why it loses you. Why is this so bad? I think just kind of understanding your sensibility, and understand that your sensibility can change too. And being open to that, and going back to things. And believe me, the MFA students have no trouble telling me what they like and don't like when we read books together, which we do in the forms classes, like the novel structure class or Ulysses, or what we do. We spend a lot of time reading books and talking about the books. And sometimes there's like these real knockdown, drag out partisans for the books, and they go at it, and it's really fun,
I bet. Another topic that's real big right now, AI. So I would imagine, but this is the question I'm going to have for you, but I would imagine that at Syracuse, there is some kind of best practices around this, maybe some recommendations from the university administration. Certainly you would probably have your own personal feelings about it. But I mean, this is an area that is like totally exploding. It's really insane. And I think young people especially are using it and already becoming dependent on it. And I think there's real questions about actually, can it be used productively and authentically and toward a genuine end, even by people who are, purport to create real authentic art? Like, to what extent can AI be used in a tool and as a tool in that? I don't think that's just a black and white question. Just like no AI, for example, right? Certainly not all AI is the question. But anyway, without rambling on any longer, how do you, as a professor at Syracuse, come at this question of your students using AI? What's the feeling like?
Well, I teach undergrads as well as grads, so it's more of a concern with the undergrads. Syracuse the graduate students tend to be really Luddite types. There's a lot of we do. But I would say that certainly with the undergrads, it comes up, and I would, if and I don't really understand AI very much. Mm-hmm. And I am also kind of a Luddite. But I would say that if you're aggregating sort of all the language usage out there, let me put it this way. Writing is about getting beyond cliches and stereotypes. It's going beyond received language. So if something is aggregating received ideas and received language, it just seems unlikely that that's going to be a great tool for you. I mean, I'm not saying there isn't some way you can play with it and have fun with it. And it can, if it unlocks something for you, I mean, that's to experiment with things. Why not? But I do think that the part of you that's trying to figure out that first draft, that's the part of your brain that you need to keep going. That's like you're taking chaos and making shape, and you don't want to just have a kind of aggregation device doing that for you. Does that make sense?
Totally. I mean, I think somebody said on my show once, the one thing that you can't teach in an MFA program is an emotional connection to the work, and certainly AI will not help you have an emotional connection to your own work.
Yeah, novels and short stories and poetry are not to be are summarizing them is not the experience, right? And so if you don't like reading, then you probably shouldn't be trying to write fiction.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. So I have one last question for you before we get into a couple of audience questions here. But I love doing a cheeky little segment called the 2-minute MFA. And that is that, only 6 people out of 600 get in every year to Syracuse. We all can't go to Syracuse. But if you could give us in 2 minutes the experience of being in your class at Syracuse, the question is, what would you, if there was like one piece of advice that you would hope that your students that you actually do teach leave with and go out into the world, and one piece of advice that maybe is particularly Dana Spiotta has your stamp on it, what would that be?
Actually, it's not a craft thing. I think beyond what I just said about having ambition artistically and not putting limits on yourself and making sure that the thing that you're doing is meaningful to you, so that you have the things that there's things you can't control, which is the reception of your work, but what you can control, your work, making sure that's giving you sustenance and organizing your life that way. I would say the other thing I think is really important is not comparing yourself to other people. I think sometimes that in an MFA program, you sort of think like we're all in the same class, and if this person gets something, then I should have it by now. And you're worried that you're behind, or or wasting time on comparing yourself to other writers and their success is a recipe for sadness and unhappy. It's not the way to. It's not going to lead to good art, and it's not going to lead to a meaningful life. But so trying to think about it's not a zero-sum thing, that support other writers, encourage other writers, and that makes the world better for all the writers. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, totally. You keep
Like what
asking
you're
if it
doing,
makes
like what
sense.
you're doing.
Yeah, everything you say is like extraordinarily lucid and passionate and great. It all makes sense. It all makes sense. But thank you. Yes.
But then the other thing I would say is
Yeah.
make sure you have a writing practice. That's another thing. Like just do it every day.
Yeah. You know what? There is a question about that. Hold on. Here's the audience question about something of your practice. This is a question from Miriam. Thank you for this question. Do you write in handwriting or in computer initially? And do you follow a writing routine?
I write in the morning, so I definitely try to write every day. I sometimes will write I have notebooks, I take notes in longhand, and I often will write scenes in those notebooks that I then put into the computer. But when I read over stuff, I add in, I tend to be like a very bare-boned writer in my first draft, and then I add in, and that's often done when it's already in the computer. So I do both. Yeah, I do. I write more on the computer than I used to, but I'm a believer in still writing longhand. I still like to do that a lot. Yeah.
Great. All right, let's do one more question. This is from Robin. Thinking back to that Colgate lecture that we were talking about, Dana, do you feel differently now, 13 years later, about anything in that lecture? I mean, do you still remember the lecture?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Do you feel differently now about it?
I think I do. I think if I do that lecture again, I would probably use different books, I guess is what I'd say.
Yeah. Okay. Why and what books?
Yeah, I think in the novel structure class, I use different books than those books. Okay. I would think it would be fun to analyze a book like Trust by Hernan Diaz, where he uses those different books that have very different styles for each. It's a very highly formally innovative book, and I think that would be an interesting one to talk about because it's very different from those others in terms of how it's organizing. So I'm always looking for new sort of ways of talking about structure, new novels, more contemporary novels. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So, folks, the book is Wayward, but Dana has written 4 other novels, right? 4 or 5?
5 altogether.
5 altogether. Check them out. The links are in the chat to buy them on bookshop.org. Dana, one last question for you. Since we're talking about form today, I guess I would just ask you this. There's a lot of writers who listen to this show. If a writer doesn't know what form their novel should take, if they're struggling with that particular aspect, how do they know when they have the right form for it?
Well, I mean, I think to get back to what you were saying about simplicity, I think I would say use chronology and a voice that, if deciding you wanted to write it in close third or you want to write it in first person and then telling the story in the chronological order that it occurs would be the sort of first place to go. And then only make it just, change that if you need to, you know what I mean? I would say start with the simple, get that voice down, get that character down, and then sort of see where that leads you. And I think then you'll get stuck somewhere and then you might have to change it. Right. Yeah. But I think sometimes a mistake is sometimes people are starting a story. Like I'll notice they'll start a story they'll put their pencil down and they'll start the story here, but they keep going into the past. And you sort of say, why don't you start back here? Yeah. Like, why are you in the present at all? And so I think sometimes just like keeping the chronology simple and then I think just, going towards the energy, going towards the complication is going to sort of reveal itself to you and not worry too much about big structural things until you've gotten some energy down, and then like, what is interesting here? What am I most interested in? Does that make sense? I can't say that. I keep saying that.
Stop.
That doesn't make sense.
The last thing I'm just gonna build on that one last question. It's like, and this is the big question. Like, so they will know, using the techniques that you just said, hopefully they will arrive upon a structure for their book that really works. But the question is like, what does it mean for a novel to really work? Like what is the goal?
I think I would say there's a couple of things. One, I think the ending is really important.
Yeah.
So when you're reading books, think about where they begin and where they end. And many books are not satisfying in the end. And I think about the end a lot. And I think I often will sort of see where I think it's going to end about halfway through the book or 2/3 of the way through the book. And when I get to a sense of like a vision of where I think it's going to end, I don't know how to get there and I kind of write toward it. But I would say the end should be feel different from what's come before, but also feel of a piece of what comes before. It should feel satisfying, sense of closure. And that closure can come from structural, formal things as well as narrative things. And it should feel somewhat inevitable. So that's the trick, like to end on that point, that steady narrowing till you get to that point. And so that would be one aspect that I think about whether a book is good or not. But I would say also there's this famous Randall Jarrell quote where it's like, how do you define a novel? And he said, a novel is a prose narrative of some length that has something wrong with it. And so I like to think of a novel's capacious. It can have many novels I love have something wrong with them. And I think it's that feeling that the writer is reaching beyond what they think they can do. And it's exciting to be there with them. And sometimes that means that there's some, messiness there or some things that they didn't quite pull off. And I guess ultimately for me, when I think about a great novel, it's that, do I feel the human on the other end? Do I feel their mind and their soul and their heart? Like when you pick up Moby Dick, you feel Melville alive in the pages. He's still there. And that to me is like a great novel.
Whew. All right, we're going to end there. Dana, this has been awesome. It's been electric. I felt you alive in that lecture, and I felt you alive today on this show, and I felt you alive in Wayward, and just the life is everywhere. So thank you for being on The Thoughtful Bro. Thank you, everyone who left comments and questions. This has been terrific having you here, Dana.
Thank you so much, Mark. It was really fun.
All right, we'll see you next time, everybody, on Thoughtful Bro.